Yes, she is. She's joining us electronically. Yes.
Test.
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 Excellent.
Thank you, Amber.
I'm on silent tonight.
I don't think,
How are you, Mayor? Good, I hope.
no.
Good.
We can go ahead and get started. Hey, everybody. I've got 6:05. I'm going to go ahead and call this August meeting of council committees. I cannot believe it's August already, to order. We'll start with the approval of we'll start with the roll call of members. Mr. Harris?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Arroyo.
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
Ms. Craig.
Here.
Ms. Diaz.
Here.
Mr. Garcia Molina.
Here.
Mr. Soto.
Here.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Here. Next, I will hear a motion for the approval of the July committee meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Are there any council comments on the minutes? All right, hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Baker.
Aye.
Ms. Craig.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Mr. Garcia Molina.
Aye.
Mr. Soto.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. Thank you. That brings us to the Personnel Committee. As Councilor Diaz is joining us electronically, she's asked Councilor Garcia Molina to chair the Personnel Committee this evening. So, Councilor Garcia Molina, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. So today's Personnel Committee, we have 4 different agenda items. The first one being the nominations of Alyssa Anderson and Jasmine Craybill for the reappointment to the Human Relations Commission, Advocacy Council. I don't believe any of them are here today.
No, for reappointment.
So motion to approve these 2 individuals.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Awesome. Our second agenda item is nomination for Darcy Pollock for reappointment to the Lancaster County Convention Center Authority. So motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Third agenda item is the nominations of Steve Schwanger, Chad Walton, Daniel Moser, Barry Sauter, and Sean Way for the reappointment of the Board of Plumbing Examiners. So motion to approve to full council.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And our last one, Mr. President, is the nominations of Daniel Becker, Mike Davis, and Stephen Lee for the reappointment to the Sewer Appeals Board. So motion to approve for full council.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And that will be all, Mr. President, for Personnel Committee.
All right, thank you very much, councilors. That brings us to the Community Planning Committee. Councilor Craig.
Thank you, Council President. Community Planning Committee has 2 items on the agenda this evening. Administration Bill Number 20, 2021, rezoning properties in the 300 block of East Liberty Street. Is there someone here to speak to that?
Mayor, Mr. President, Madam Chair, my name is Melvin Hess. I'm from Gibble, Crable, and Hess, and I am here with the co-applicant, one of the applicants, I should say, Larry DeMarco, and his architectural consultant, Joel Sims. I handed out some exhibits to the committee. And I believe you have in your packet lots of information pertaining to this application. And tonight we're looking for a favorable recommendation and to pass on this matter to the full council. I'm going to ask Mr. Sims very quickly to just discuss the proposed project. And also, I want to note, I'm not going to tax your patience with any comments because you have one excellent memo in your packet from Douglas that analyzes the zoning, and compares the CU to the MU. So it's a very, very thoughtful and very excellent analysis. And so I won't spend a lot of time discussing the various zoning districts and the regulations, but I would ask for Mr. Sims, with your permission, just to quickly talk about the proposed development. Could you quickly identify yourself?
Yes, Joel Sims, president of Sims Architects.
And if you would kind of just kindly discuss what's proposed.
There are a number of buildings that are listed in your packet that are there on Liberty Street, and we've labeled them because they, there's quite a few of them. And what Mr. DeMarco is wanting to do is to be a part of adding apartments to the city. And there's a number of uses there now, but what we'd like to do is add additional apartments, perhaps some indoor parking, as well as
You can refer to these.
self-storage.
You can refer to those.
Okay. So just to go through each page briefly, on Exhibit B, it shows the highlighted area. There's one little part out there that's actually a beer distributor that is not owned by Mr. DeMarco, but it's included in the application. So you see on the next page that is highlighted. So we're seeking approval for the entire parcel. On Exhibit B, you'll see some existing photos. The one building that comes out to Liberty Street, it's quite historic, very nice brick building. We're looking at keeping that and adding around it. You can see that more on the second page of Exhibit B. And you'll also see on page 2 of Exhibit B, right across the street is a residential neighborhood. So it's really in keeping with what's there now. The final page on Exhibit B just shows the beer distributor side view of that building. And then, well, I thought it was the last page. The final page of Exhibit B, as you'll see, there's a number of buildings with garages that currently house auto repair, a tire installer. So those would also be included as part of the project. If you turn to Exhibit C, now it might make a little more sense when I said there's a bunch of buildings with numbers. So for reference, I always use Building 3 because that's the one that's out at the street, that's the brick facade, has a painting on the side. So for reference, if you look at that, there's a couple smaller buildings on the right as you're facing, and then there's Building 4 and 5, which were those loading docks that you see in the photos. And then Building 7, 8, 9, and 10 are the garages, auto repair, and tire shop that are in there. And then 11 is currently vacant, but it's been used for storage in the past. And so that kind of shows you what's there as an existing situation. And then the next page, we've had to change the orientation, but there again, if you look at the really long building, that's Building 3. And what we've done is we've added commercial. So like on the basement plan, we've kept commercial there. There's currently a hair studio there. On the first floor, we've added a number of apartments, as well as the second floor and the third floor. If you look at the page titled Z3, it shows the area that's currently the repair, tire repair shop, auto mechanic, and we're proposing a variety of things. In this layout, we show indoor parking. Some of those businesses may very well stay and be incorporated. We're just really looking at a zoning change at this point and These are very preliminary drawings. What we did show on this is the back area is high enough, it's over 20 feet high, possibly adding self-storage back there, or it could even be more apartments. Then Exhibit D, we've created some renderings that are very preliminary. So you see the long building, that's actually a rendering of Building 3, but we want to just keep it the way it is with the historical brick and stone. It's a very nice building. Over to the right there, that's Building 1 and 2 that would become apartments. And then the next page shows to the left of Building 3, which would change sort of that loading dock area into a nicer area, perhaps a coffee shop or some type of offices there with, you know, with apartments back behind it. And then the next page again just shows more of taking the existing building, improving some of the facades, adding parking, or sorry, adding apartments. And then I'll just touch on the very last page, which is this one here that just says Liberty, which would be where there would be perhaps some commercial spaces staying, whether it's the automotive repair or furniture store or you name it, and then some parking and storage as part of that. And here again, these are very preliminary, but the main focus is to be able to add apartments. There's, as you know, there's a great need for apartments in the city, and this is an ideal opportunity to add apartments.
Joe, very quickly, you're familiar with the neighborhood surrounding this property, are you not?
Yes.
Do you have an opinion, sir, whether or not what's proposed could have an adverse impact on the surrounding community, or would it have a positive impact?
I believe it would have a positive impact based on the fact that there's residential even right across the street. There's a nice Chinese grocery store that I've been to in the past. It's right there as well. So just to keep with the character.
Gentlemen, can you just move a little closer to the microphone?
sorry.
Thank you.
And Larry's here, and we're going to have Larry address the committee as well. But very quickly, based on your experience working with Larry, has he been sensitive to the current tenants?
Yes, he has. Actually, every time I'm over there, they all know him by first name and talk to him. I own a building in the city, and I'm very active with my tenants, and he's the same way. They all know him, and he's very approachable.
Okay. I don't have any additional questions for this witness, but questions for the committee?
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee?
If I may, Councilor
Go
Clerk?
ahead.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but how many units do you expect to fit as far as residential units in this, if it were to be rezoned and developed?
I think these preliminary plans showed about 60 units that consist of studio, 1-bedroom, and 2-bedroom apartments.
And as far as the existing tenants there, I know there's a number of small businesses that are currently tenants there. What conversations are being had as far as potential renting space for them in the future, or have there been conversations being had at all?
Perhaps, sir, if I can have Larry
Sure.
answer that. This is Mr. DeMarco, and he's not a stranger to Lancaster. He has other properties here. He's committed to Lancaster. He's committed to this project, and has a good relationship with the tenants in the neighborhood. So go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate your time. I'm very transparent with the tenants for years. And I just said, yeah, if there's ever an opportunity, I might like to make some apartments, but the zoning wouldn't allow me. So now it's a good time. So, and before we even did anything with the planning commission, I already spoke with several tenants. And when there was a newspaper article, I had a few phone calls, but then I went and talked to a couple other tenants. And I said, look, this is what I'm planning on doing. As soon as we have commercial space, if it fits your need and it worked for everybody, they've been with me a long time. So I want to be loyal to them too, if I can.
Thank you.
Yep.
And again, I apologize if I missed this, but with 60 residential units, how many units are expected to be commercial, this new development?
8,500 square feet commercial.
Yeah, I think it's about 8,000 square feet. The 60 apartments do not include the commercial space, so there's additional commercial space on top of the apartments.
Great, thank you. That's all, Councilor Craig.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee?
I do. Douglas, I know we received the recommendation and kind of the synopsis from you, but would you be able to kind of summarize that for us and kind of the process they've been through? And from your perspective, really, why this is a unanimous vote for the commission?
Sure, happy to answer that, counselors. So the planning staff and planning commission really did its best to look at this as a land use decision. The land development and the further development on the property will be handled through the land development planning process. So to summarize briefly, the 2.5 acres total are changing from central manufacturing to mixed use. Central manufacturing provides for a number of pretty intensive uses on the site, including things like large commercial uses like improvement store, home improvement stores, or auto mechanic repair shops, as well as no entertainment uses at all. It also allows for more intensive things like utilities and waste facilities, things of that sort. These are uses that don't seem to be compatible with the residential neighborhood across the street. Fortunately, for many years, Mr. DeMarco has been using the property in ways that are seem to be compatible with the neighborhood through commercial uses. So the mixed-use zoning district was developed specifically to rehabilitate properties along the railroad. This is dating back many years now, many decades, and has been very successful at doing that. So it seemed logical to choose the mixed-use zoning district for recommendation, given that it's also nearby and would allow for some more neighborhood-type uses that could go there. For instance, neighborhood-style businesses such as eating and drinking establishments, food stores, pet stores, beauty shops. Some of these uses are already taking place in the building anyway. It would also, most importantly, allow for residential and multifamily to occur there. Given the size of the building and the opportunity for residential there, it seemed to allow for, mixed use would be the most logical district. I will also say that, some of the surrounding neighborhoods, of course, seem to be compatible with this land use recommendation as well. There are a couple of plans to point to in terms of consistency. The Lancaster County Planning Commission did review this rezoning, and they agreed that it was in keeping with Places 2040, the county plan, as well as growing together. They said the rezoning was partially consistent, and you should have the attached review from them. Building on strength, this site is outside of the boundary, although the plan does generally advocate for infill and a mix of uses. And finally, the Lancaster City Comprehensive Plan, as you know, is quite out of date at this point, but there are many recommendations from that support the reuse of old, commercial and industrial buildings. So that is a very brief overview of the memo. The Planning Commission did unanimously recommend that this be approved. There were some comments offered from the Planning Commission, which are also mentioned in the memo. After the approval was provided, myself and other Planning Commission members suggested that because the site has been so successful at incubating many local businesses over the years, that it would be considerate of Mr. DeMarco to offer some of the existing tenants an opportunity, which he did mention. Commissioners also noted the importance of providing affordable housing and retaining the historic character of the site.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Douglas. Go ahead, Councilman Soto.
I know it was mentioned before, but the bill distributor, is this part of this whole development, or?
I'll say it's not a part of the developments as far as I understand, but when their team initially brought this rezoning to us, it did not include the beer distributor, and it was staff recommendation that the beer distributor be included. It made sense since the beer distributor is literally surrounded by this parcel that the whole area be rezoned for mixed use. That beer distributor parcel is also CM or central manufacturing right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there anything
And he joined in the application, by the way.
Yes, it is in the application.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Any other questions from council? Questions from the public? I'll hear a motion to move this to full council.
Motion to move this to full council.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
very much for your time.
Our second item on the agenda this evening is Administration Resolution number 44, amending the Community Development Block Grant Action Plan. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
I think it's actually,
There's one right here.
is there another one there?
Yeah.
It's like so many wires.
If you want to keep, yeah, there's one more loop.
There you go.
Hi, it's good to see you. Good to see you.
Having us here tonight. I wanted to start by
You think?
introducing the team. I think not all of you have met all of us. So I am Rebecca Geiser. I am the Deputy Director in CPED over Health, Housing, and Community Development. I started in April, so good to see you all here. And introducing the team here, Craig Walt, who is the Bureau Chief of Community Development.
Can I stop you for just 1 second? Is the sound okay for you, Amber?
No, I can't hear it.
Okay, so I'm gonna, yeah, we're gonna have, yeah,
You can speak into the podium would be ideal.
yeah.
We don't have microphones at all of the places we need them quite yet.
That piece doesn't detach?
Last time, weren't we able to move the microphone?
I know.
Or was that a different
We
microphone?
had we had
Yeah,
one
it's a
extra.
different microphone.
We're getting there.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
No
you.
problem. So Craig Walt is our Bureau Chief for Lead Safety and Community Development. This is the first time he's presenting as well. And maybe many of you know Susanna Thorson, Senior Community Development Administrator. So thanks for having us to talk tonight about the Community Development Block Grant Action Plan. And we're presenting tonight on a resolution for two points. One, to approve the budget allocation categories for the third round of Cdbg COVID funding. And the second part, to approve a budget revision to the allocation categories for the 2019 base Cdbg funding. So we have many years over which to spend the Cdbg money, and so we still have money left from 2019, and we need to propose to Cdbg how we're going to spend that money, and so that's why this is coming right now to council. Cdbg is a key way that the city can support the strategic plan by funding our priorities and supporting partners to implement their plans on our strategic goals. And each year, the city receives about $1.7 million in Cdbg funding. And these funds are really a driver of community development in Lancaster. I think probably many of you are familiar over the years of Cdbg, but I think it's helpful sometimes to just revisit it as we cover a lot of topics. So the three of us have been working with Director Chris Dels to develop these budget allocations that we are seeking to match the city's strategic priorities, and really look forward to sharing our work with you tonight.
Hi, everyone.
So I'm just kind of giving you the context you need to review our plan. What you're looking at in this first slide here is just the allocations we've received for the COVID CDBG dollars over the past 2 years. We received 3 rounds of funding. The first round was for approximately $1 million, and we didn't receive anything for the second round, and we received about $500,000 for the third round. Tonight, we're making a decision on that third round of CDBG CV dollars. I just want to give you, you've seen this slide various times at this point, and I appreciate your patience, but just to give you an idea about what this money can be spent for. This money, starting with the understanding that this money is really intended for our low and moderate income community members to try and help them get to a place of economic sustainability. Once you understand that, you can kind of broaden your understanding to what's eligible as far as activities or programming. We have sort of main categories up here, but with the understanding that they can kind of branch off into more specific programming. But just to give you a general idea, the big one, quality affordable housing solutions, figuring out ways to retain and build affordable housing. Also, we can commit money to diminishing blight. We can do that through acquiring blighted properties or rehabbing blighted properties. There's also economic development. There's some strategies there that you can look at around micro enterprise or small business development and public services and public facilities. You can use this money to really help public services and public facilities in the community provide those services to the community. One last piece is all of these programs really need to prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID because they are through the CARES Act. Finally, I just wanted to give you an overview of the process. We can dive into the details with this during our question section if you would like. You've seen this before with the other rounds, but I just wanted to give you an idea of where we are. Pretty early on in the process at this point, we did some needs analysis, and right now what we're doing, we're right at that second square, so pretty early on, where we're just trying to get a general plan to HUD so that they can understand what our intentions are for this money, and we can start building a strategy from there. And I'm gonna hand it over to Greg.
Thank you, Susanna, and good evening, Council, Mayor, members of the public. I just want to start off by saying it's a real honor to be here with you this evening. As a new employee of the City of Lancaster and a new Lancaster City resident, I'm really excited to be able to share a plan with you this evening. So as Susanna previously mentioned, the City of Lancaster is being allocated approximately $550,000 for this third round of CDBG funding. And so we overall are proposing to apply this across 2 main categories, and that's planning and public services. So in regards to planning, we see this as a really great opportunity to invest a little bit more in this planning category because how it works with the CV allocations, typically planning and admin is capped at 20% of our total award. And in the previous CV allocations, we have been underutilizing the planning and admin category. So we saw this as a great opportunity to invest a little bit more in the planning piece. As we're coming out of COVID, understanding the health needs of the community as well as other post-COVID impacts, we just thought this was a great opportunity to do some additional post-COVID planning. Additionally, understanding the community health needs post-COVID-19 is really critical to advocating for the health and safety of our community. This is true at the neighborhood level, at the municipal level, county level, and even at the state and federal level. So in addition, kind of related to health and social needs of the community, we also saw a really great opportunity to invest additional dollars in our public services category. So public services are typically capped at 15% with our CDBG base funding. But with our CV awards, these this funding is exempt from that 15% cap. So as you can see, the second bullet point, we're proposing to allocate a little over $280,000 towards public services. We're seeing this as an opportunity to address findings from a community health needs assessment, enhance community-based health and social services, and also to provide relief to nonprofit social service agencies that are really on the front lines of responding to COVID-19, and will also be assisting our community in the recovery. The other thing that this does by putting extra funds in the public services category is it provides a lot of flexibility to continue to respond to emerging needs of COVID-19. And so actually, if you could go to the next slide, please. This is a comprehensive list, but it's not limited to the items on this list of all the things that can be supported within the public service category. And so as you can see, many of these things would be exacerbated or impacted by COVID-19. So if you could also go to the next slide, thanks. We also wanted to share this with you. This is community input that we gathered during the consolidated plan process several months ago. And I think it's interesting that as we're looking at what the community has highlighted as critical public service needs, mainly those top 3 to 5 or so items listed, I think those are interestingly some of the main public service areas that would be impacted by COVID-19. And I even think some of the downstream impacts have not even been realized yet. So again, going back to that flexibility, this is just a really great opportunity to continue to monitor the disparities that are happening in our community among our most vulnerable residents, and then be able to respond to that, to the increased need for a variety of health and social services in our community. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the other thing we wanted to share with you this evening, in addition to the CV3 allocations, is we're also looking to do a prior year budget amendment. And so in reviewing our prior year spending, we were observing that there's some programs and activities that have underspent, and we're also seeing housing rehab needs exacerbated due to the financial impacts of COVID-19. The other thing we started to observe, specifically with our critical repair program, is that there was some access barriers. And so we saw this as a unique opportunity to pilot a critical repair grant program for residents that would be classified as very low income homeowners. And so the general principle of the critical repair program is that homeowners forego critical repairs due to financial constraints. And clearly we can see those constraints exacerbated by COVID-19. So in regards to the critical repair grant program, what we're looking to do is introduce a grant option for very low income families. That would be families at or below 50% AMI, which is $41,500 for a family of 4. And so typically our critical repair program is offered as a loan program. And so we're really seeing this as an opportunity to, one, decrease access barriers, but also focus that on our most underserved residents. The other thing is that this program is going to be available to all city homeowners that meet the household income criteria, but we're going to be marketing this program in tandem with our lead hazard control and healthy homes program. So what that will do is essentially target this program towards our 4 census tracts that are targeted by the HUD program. But to clarify, this program is available to all city homeowners that meet the household criteria. So I just wanted to throw this out there. If any members of the public have any questions about this program and would like to access it, please call the Bureau of Lead Safety and Community Development at 717-291-4730. And then I also wanted to show, again, some input that was collected during the consolidated planning process. And if you see the arrows off to the left, those highlight 3 main areas that this critical repair grant program aims to address. So again, we're trying to listen to the feedback from the community, seeing what resources and tools we have available, and really align those things to meet the needs of our community. Next slide, please. And I think with that, I will pass it back to Deputy Director Geisler. Thank you very much.
Thanks. So we wanted to zoom back out again and highlight the total available CDBG base and CDBG COVID budget allocation across all of the program categories. And this includes the remaining funds from prior years and the current program year, and is essentially the collective CDBG budget portfolio and the priorities for that funding, after adding the round 3 of COVID dollars and then reallocating the funds that we're recommending in this resolution. We've included the 5-year funding strategy as described in the 2021-2025 consolidated plan. And so typically, as I mentioned earlier, we receive about $1.7 million in CDBG base funding, and programming is implemented within these 5 broad categories as detailed in that 5-year plan that we submitted to HUD already earlier this year. And in presenting this substantial amendment to you today, we thought it was important to not only highlight where the overall CDBG program budget currently stands, but also to leave you with these 5 funding priorities that are set for the upcoming years in alignment with the mayor's strategic priorities. So with the influx of COVID dollars and the ability to spend these funds over several years alongside of our annual CDBG annual allocation, it's important to view this collectively and comprehensively. So we can see from this very last slide, this is our full portfolio of flexible funding, 40% to maintaining affordable, good quality housing, 27% to promoting neighborhood quality of life, 16% to planning and administration, 13% to increasing affordable, good quality housing, and 4% to expanding economic opportunity. And you can see the total dollars there. So these funds are, although they're highly regulated and coming from federal government, really HUD has a lot of requirements for us, but also flexible in between these categories where we can prioritize. So we as a team here, particularly the 4 of us, have been working closely together for this recommendation into the broad buckets that we can use the needs assessment and then determine, flesh out the plans as we go along. So we welcome your questions at this point.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Are there questions from the committee?
If I may, Councilor Clerk? For the critical repair program, is that only accessible for homeowners, or will renters similar to the lead program have access in some way to those funds? Okay. Do we have data that shows how many homeowners in the city fall within that category, the low income category by chance? Okay, no worries.
We can get that to you, Councilor
That'd be
Arroyo.
great,
Thanks.
thanks. That's all.
Yeah, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
So I think the idea of investing more in planning is really important. And so we're investing over double what we're used to. What outputs or outcomes are we really anticipating to get from this large investment during the planning phase?
Which category was that? I didn't.
For planning?
For planning, okay. So we are, given COVID, the COVID situation, we really saw that our health, that our community is really in need of health. So we're looking at doing a community health needs assessment for the city specifically. So many studies have been done across the countywide by LGH and by Union Community Cares, but none of them have drilled down specifically for the city. And so we want to look at a needs assessment for health, but that can also encompass wider things like substance abuse, as you saw in the previous slide. Housing is also a part of health. So really we're looking at sort of health and social determinants of health as a broad category. And then from that needs assessment, being able to decide where to put those implementation funds as we move along based on that needs assessment specifically for the city residents.
And if I could follow up on that, the other part of this is that we would also have more effectively be able to advocate for drug and alcohol, mental health, and other healthcare resources that we need. And I will say that one of the encouraging conversations that we're having is with the Office of Aging about focusing more specifically on city residents as it relates to the needs. And Len Weibel has been part of, last week we had a age-friendly cities planning event, and Lon participated in that. And so we are beginning to look at how we can better intersect with some of the services that the county offers in a more coordinated way. At the same time, we don't have a needs assessment that's specific to the city, and this is a challenge for us in a lot of different ways, but definitely from an advocacy point of view, in terms of being able to say this is what we need and this is how we know it.
Yeah, which I totally appreciate and wholeheartedly support. So are we thinking that there would be one community assessment that will be completed, or are we looking to partner with the Office of Aging and with other individuals so that they can complete their own kind of sections of a community needs assessment?
Good question. I think we would look at a comprehensive plan of how to engage our partners in that process. Likely, we'll use our funding to help lead that, but also, of course, engaging, particularly with healthcare organizations, housing. I think it can really be an expansive definition of health.
Perfect.
And I think, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're also looking at this as sort of being a template that we could update over time. Is that what we were thinking about, or am I confusing that with something else?
So when we collect the quantitative data for the needs assessment, that some of that information will come from the Department of Health and other publicly available data sources. So when we fill those in, as those data sources get updated, we'll also be able to update that data. So I'm looking to provide a chart of health statistics and sort of name how often they're updated and what the sources are, so then we can readily update that template with updated statistics and track trends over time.
Great. So kind of like a community transparent dashboard we would have that the community could see that's updated?
That would be fantastic.
Awesome. And then I guess my last question is, because like in this particular scenario, right, we have the problem identification, we have the planning, and that's directly going to impact the services that we provide. Have there been conversations that have taken place on how do we center this planning and data collection around marginalized communities that have been impacted? Because I think that's like something that's been missing in community needs assessments, is that there really hasn't been a large focus on minorities and the LGBTQ plus community. Is that something that you all are trying to figure out? How do you center that?
Most certainly. I think particularly in the city, this is really important to look at each of our subpopulations and how health disparities impact each of those subpopulations. And when the needs assessments have been done at a county level, the city is just one small part of that. And so it looks more homogeneous maybe over the whole county. And so as we look at the city, there'll be more opportunity to drill down into those individual data sets. And as we spoke with Union Community Cares, is a new name. They've really looked at their own data sets with their health disparities in city-only residents. And so looking at that model to continue to really drill down.
Awesome. I really appreciate you.
And just to follow up on that, one of the things that as we've looked at this and we've done some preliminary analysis to like, is there a needs assessment out there already? What Union Community Care does is very important, and that will be an important data set, but they're only asking their own patients. And so that's a limitation of the effort, but they will also be partners in this, as well as other healthcare providers in the community.
I think it's great.
Of course, LGH has wide experience in community health needs assessments as well, so partnering with them would be important.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from the committee?
Councilor Craig, if I have one more.
Go ahead.
Thanks, sorry. As far as the expanding economic opportunity, is that the microloan fund from the city, or?
Yeah, of course. So let's see if I can do this from memory, and I can send the specifics over to you. You're completely right. The majority of it goes toward assets for their micro enterprise, which is another term for small business education program. But we also did provide some money to our permitting office ensure that businesses that need permits are able to continue to get that support.
And this might be a question outside the scope of this resolution, but as far as the small business relief fund that stemmed from the pandemic, is that part of this, or is that, see?
Very good question. And actually, this team here had not worked on that particular project. The funding that is identified here within Cdbg for expanding economic opportunity is helping with the business technical assistance to assets. But what you've asked about, Counselor, is the Small Business Relief Fund. We loaned $250,000 to Community First Fund. We actually took that funding from our enterprise zone loan fund, so it's separate from Cdbg, but happy to provide any additional information on the progress of the Community First Fund and Assets Partnership as well.
No, that works. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay,
Councilor Craig, may I?
Counselor Soto.
I see you mentioned services for homeless persons. Can you elaborate more on that for me, please?
Sure. Is that the 66,000? Yes, sure. So we are working with a community partner to fund an outreach worker for downtown to work with the population that is gathering. Some of them are homeless, some of them are not homeless, but downtown, and trying to connect them with the appropriate services. So that will be a full-time outreach worker working right in Center City to work on with individuals that are there in, previously in Vince Park. Now there are, kind of different areas where people are congregating, but working there, kind of being right there where people are to be able to help connect them with the services right where they are.
And who's doing that now? We don't have any.
No, and so this is really filling the gap between what the Homeless Coalition can provide because of the restriction for their HUD funding and the requirement that individuals meet the definition of homelessness versus the fact that there are a number of individuals who are on the street who may or may not be homeless, but who are facing other needs. And so we are using some of the Cdbg funding to provide that flexibility for this person to serve as a liaison. This is not to take away from any of the outreach support that Lanco My Home is offering, and that we have previously and continue to support through CARES dollars. We funded one additional full-time outreach person, as well as the day shelter and I believe some other programming. So this is not to replace that. This is to complement that and to address some of the needs for folks that are falling in between in that gap. I will also say that position is being funded through the Lancaster City Alliance, and there's been an effort to go ahead and hire that person, and so they actually started yesterday. I believe, is today Tuesday? No, today's Monday, so maybe today. I'm getting my weeks mixed up. That person will begin and will be working under the auspices of the in partnership with the Ambassador Program. And there's a national entity that supports the Ambassador Program who has a model that they've used in other cities for this community outreach specialist. So that person will be able to tap into other communities and other resources and other strategies and ideas to help support that, as well as our local infrastructure network to support individuals who are on the street for a variety of reasons.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all I have, Council.
Thank you. Will the outreach person be ongoing?
Yes, that is the goal. This is a pilot this year using these funds. And the idea is that if this is successful, then could be a partnership between the city, but also funded in part by other private dollars to offset the cost. So this is something that we want to give a try to, because clearly there's a need, and it's a conversation that, at our last meeting, there was a lot of conversation about people who are on the street. And there are a lot of services that are available, and yet there are still folks who are not availing themselves to those services. And so the outreach and the intentionality and the consistency of that outreach has to be there to support some of the folks who in my estimation, are not being served by being on the street.
Thank you. Are there questions from the public?
If I may, and if you can hear me well,
Go ahead, Counselor Diaz.
is there anyone that actually takes the opportunity to process applications for residents that may not understand the process? I've gotten so many questions, even an idea of hiring someone that could actually take the time and spend that's basically what they would be responsible for. Anything related to some type of grant or some type of funding for low income, that they'll be able to help them go through the process, because many times they don't understand what they're required, what they're not required, what they need to bring, what they not need to bring. So I'm questioning in reference to the CDG, is there anybody that is responsible that can actually work just doing that?
Are you referring to the critical repair program, Counselor?
Yes.
Good evening, Councilor Diaz. Thanks for that question. Yeah, there's definitely access barriers for these HUD-funded programs. And that was one of the reasons why we thought it was a great opportunity to remove the loan portion of the program and make it a grant program for very low-income homeowners. But to answer your question, what we're looking to do is kind of piggyback this critical repair program on the lead hazard control and healthy homes program. So we have 2 outreach workers that are budgeted for that, and also brought on a new hire, Amaryllis Torres, who essentially is a program enrollment specialist for the program. And so while that team's primary focus is the lead hazard control program, this kind of offering the critical repair grant program in tandem with that office will really help those individuals navigate city residents through the application process. So the outreach workers can do a little bit more of that pre-application legwork, whereas the program enrollment specialist is really looking to form a relationship with each participant in this program and follow them through the process. And I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
It did. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the public? No, hearing none. Motion to move this to full council on the 10th.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Council President, that ends community planning.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. That brings us to the Finance Committee. Councilor Bakay, please.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. President. It's a little closer to me here. The Finance Committee has 2 items on the agenda, and I believe they're both related to one another. It's Bill number 19 and Resolution number 47, and Patrick Hopkins will be speaking to us about these this evening.
Thanks, Councilor Bakay. Good evening, Council. So as Councilor Bakay mentioned, both of these items are really interconnected. So Bill number 19 and Resolution number 48 are dealing with the same issue, just different aspects of that same issue. So this is really just a matter of timing for a number of different things that came together in a very fortunate way for us. And this relates solely to the city water system. So there is a property that's about 30.4 acres that is adjacent to the Oyster Point Reservoir, which is located off of Stony Battery Road in West Hempfield Township. Actually, it's on the border of West Hempfield and East Hempfield Township. The border goes right through the property. This 30.4 acre piece of property had been owned by a family, and then a widow who died, I believe, sometime during 2020. While I don't believe it was actually officially part of her estate, she had been, because neighboring the city water service property for decades, had an interest in seeing the city actually be able to take over that property. We viewed it, Public Works Department, Engineering, and others viewed it as a logical place for potential location of future infrastructure expansion of the water system. If you look at the entire city of Lancaster water system and where it has expanded, this is in the sort of the right area of where, additional expansion of the system outside of the city is located. We don't have a particular plan right now for the use of the property, but if you look at a map of the area around here, it is completely surrounded by residential and commercial areas immediately adjacent to the property. And then at the southern border of the property is Route 30. So it is in a very likely location where development would happen on this property, were the city not to take ownership of it. And then our Oyster Point Reservoir property would be landlocked, and we wouldn't have the future expansion capability. So the timing of this was that with the executor of the woman's estate owns the property now. There was other private sector interest in the property, and we felt like we had to move fairly quickly to be able to get control of the property and then do our own due diligence. So in the middle of June, we signed a purchase agreement for the property for a total price of $5.9 million. In the midst of that process, we had an appraisal done by a firm that we've used for other property appraisals, and that $5.9 million value, while $5.9 million is a lot of money, that also was in line with the appraisal of the property because of the development opportunities that existed for the property. The next bit of timing is typically this would be the type of purchase that we would include in a capital improvement plan, so it would be funded through bond funds. We're at a point with the additional or continued spending down of the 2018 bond funds, and you know that we've brought to you the Penvest loan applications. So basically all of the dollars that we have in hand right now for water system projects are all allocated to those projects. We didn't have another $5.9 million sort of bucket of money sitting there that was available to use for this purchase. And at the same time, the third bit of timing was that we got the American Rescue Plan funding allocation. We learned about the number in March. We actually drew down the first 50% of the funding in the early to mid-July, early July, I guess it was. So we received about $19.75 million of funding, which is the first half of the American Rescue Plan funds that were allocated. And within the American Rescue Plan Act, water infrastructure, including future expansion capabilities, is a defined eligible expense. Rather than going out and doing a sort of a one-off banknote or something like that right now, it made sense to, because this purchase is an eligible use of the ARPA funds, to request your authorization to allocate $5.9 million from the American Rescue Plan Act that we've received so far to this particular project, because the 90-day due diligence period that started in the middle of June ends about in the middle of September. And so we have to move, during that period of time to actually effectuate the purchase of the property. The resolution piece of this is similar to what we've done with the Penvest loans. We have, you all have approved a reimbursement resolution, which means that if we spend dollars up front, we can reimburse ourselves with those Penvest loan proceeds. And this is very similar to that. So in this case, we would basically use the American Rescue Plan Act funding as our cash flow to purchase this property. At a later date, the reimbursement resolution allows us to do another bond issue, go to a bank and get a banknote, and the proceeds of that banknote or that bond issue would go to pay back this American Rescue Plan Act allocation. So essentially, we'd be spending the $5.9 million now. Sometime in the next 3 years, and that's a requirement under the IRS code, we could do that other borrowing and pay ourselves back for the $5.9 million that we spent this year to purchase this property. So while we're allocating the ARPA funds for this, that is not intended to be a permanent allocation of the ARPA funds. We would get those funds back at a later date. So that's how the two pieces of legislation, the ordinance and the bill and the resolution work together.
Patrick, can you talk a little bit about, so we know about the timing and why this is important right now. You may not have an exact number, but am I correct in assuming that if we wouldn't get this property at this time, if we wanted to make expansions to our water system in that area or outside of our area, we would be much higher than 5.9 million if we weren't to get an adjacent property?
Well, there are no other adjacent properties
Right.
to the land where Oyster Point Reservoir is located. And again, if you look at a map of that area, it is surrounded by suburban residential and commercial development. There are no other properties, especially of this size, that are near enough to Oyster Point to make them worthwhile. And at the same time, those are also areas where development pressure is pretty significant. So that's sort of the piece of this timing is we feel like we need to act now to get control of this property. For planning purposes, at a later date, make a determination about what facilities can best work there for the future expansion of the water system.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Or members of council?
Councilor Baker, may I?
Yes.
Thank you. So Patrick, if we spend the 5.9 million and then essentially reimburse our pool of ARPA funds at a later date, the reimbursed funds essentially would act in all other ways as ARPA funds and be subject to the same guidelines and timelines? So really what I'm asking is if it has to be allocated by 2024 and spent by 2026?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
If, say, 3 years out, right, we're at the end of 2024 pushing, right, would we still have to, if that money comes back in, would it then need to be reallocated by December of that year or?
So that's still somewhat of an open question, although our initial interpretation based on guidance that we've seen is the U.S. Treasury guidance on the use of the ARPA funds is a one-time requirement. So if we are making the allocation, in this case for the purchase of this property, and it's deemed to be an eligible use of the ARPA funds, that we have satisfied the American Rescue Plan Act guidance. We do not have to pay ourselves back, right? There could be, theoretically, there could be a decision within the next 3 years. We're not going to issue debt to, a bank note or a bond issue to pay this back. I don't expect that that's going to be the case, but theoretically that could happen. But if we, our read at this point is that if we make that decision to pay ourselves back, the requirements don't go back on those funds because those are not American Rescue Plan Act funds. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think
and I'm not providing that as a definitive answer, right? There are still lots of questions that are out there about how the guidance works, but that's our initial read.
So if I may, Councilor Baker.
Continue, yes.
If that is the case, is there anything that about us choosing, about the proposed, we'll call it a good faith plan, to reimburse the pool of ARPA funds that makes that special or necessary, or is it just that we'll be adding $5.9 million back to, say, the general fund? And
yeah, and the way we are setting up a separate fund, much like we do when we do a borrowing, a bond issue, We are setting up a separate fund strictly for the American Rescue Plan Act funding.
Bless you.
I think the way that this would likely work is we would do borrowing a bank note, a bond issue that is water fund debt. We would pay back the American Rescue Plan Act fund for that $5.9 million expenditure, except that the use then of those $5.9 million obviously would have to come back to City Council for appropriation. I just don't think that the requirements that are on ARPA dollars strictly would apply to that 5.9 million.
Thank you. Councilor Baker.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from council?
If I may, Councilor Baker?
Yes, please.
Mr. Hopkins, as far as we have a 3-year timeline to pay ourselves back, is there any plan or what would trigger the moment for us to start pursuing that option?
Sometime before the 3rd year, right? Making the definitive decision we're going to pay ourselves back. And then it's really just a matter of the process. Do we have another capital bond issue that we're putting together? We typically bundle a large group of projects and put them together into one bond issue. So is the timing on that right within the next 3 years? Or do we not have a bundle of projects and do we want to simply go out and do a bank note for $5.9 million? Or is another Penvest opportunity out there? Or infrastructure dollars that might be coming down through additional federal legislation. So sort of those are kind of the options that we think are out there, and the timing of them is really going to depend on sort of the timing of each of those opportunities and what's the right mix at the time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hopkins.
Sure.
Hearing no other comments, I'll take any comments or questions from the public on these items. And Mr. Harris, can we take these together as a motion? Since they will be on the same, or should they be separate because they're a resolution and a bill?
Yeah.
We can do that.
And I'm sorry, could I just throw in one other
Please.
comment? So because the resolution is a 1-reading thing and the ordinance is a 2-reading thing, the idea was that we would have the ordinance have first reading at the next council meeting and adoption vote at the second reading, and have the resolution be on the agenda for the second meeting so that you're doing an adoption vote for each of them at the same meeting.
Got it. So that would be the 24th for the second meeting, looking at my calendar. I'll hear a motion for bill number 19.
So moved.
Sorry, Mr. Soto, continue. I heard you starting first.
I make a motion to move bill number 19 to full council.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. And I'll hear a motion on resolution number 47, keeping in mind the timing.
I'm sorry, 47 or 48?
It's actually 48.
48, looking at my copy. Resolution number 48.
I make a motion to move resolution number 48 to full council on the 24th.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. That concludes my committee, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. That will move us to the Public Works Committee. Councilor Soto, please.
Thank you, Council President. I move forward to move a Public Works Committee meeting open at this time. There are 3 items on the agenda. First item on the agenda is resolution number 45, authorizing for a Keystone Communities Grant for version 0 implementation on South Queen and South Prince Streets. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you very much, Council. I'm very happy to be here to talk briefly about both of these Keystone opportunities. This is an opportunity for us to utilize state funds through the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. In the first case, for planning for Vision Zero. As you know, Vision Zero is
as far as I'm concerned, the crown jewel of our vision for what the public right-of-way in the city of Lancaster can be about. It's about ensuring that the streets are safe, that we are endeavoring to have zero deadly or severe injuries by pedestrians, bicyclists, or vehicles on the streets of the city of Lancaster. And we've just completed the first key phases of the assessment of the streets. It has identified a high injury network and indicated several parts of the city and key intersections that are at great risk for injury, et cetera. In line with our block strength index, which is the entity that helps us decide what is most important, what are the areas in the communities that are in greatest need, there is a high block strength index in the area south of King Street between Prince and Queen Streets. And that also coincides with some of the high impact networks of the Vision Zero. This $25,000 is to do some of that investigation of not where should it be, but what kinds of interventions should be considered for traffic calming, for pedestrian safety, for crosswalks, for signage, for lighting, for signaling. That would be consistent with Vision Zero in order to try to fulfill the goals of Vision Zero and reduce the injuries in that high injury network. It's a modest endeavor, which will allow us to do the kind of thing that the next request will be doing, and I'll talk about that shortly.
Do we have any questions from the committee? Do we have any questions for the rest of the council? Hearing none, do we have any questions from the public? Hearing none, I'd like to make a motion to move resolution number 45 to full council at the next scheduled meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and that will bring us to administration resolution number 46, authorizing an application for a Keystone Communities grant for streetscape improvements on Southand Street. Mr. Campbell, please.
Yes, in many ways, this is what you would expect to be the phase 2 of the earlier
Resolution.
piece, but in a different location. So we're looking for approximately $500,000. Basically, there actually is an internal grant so that the total value of the work proposed can be up to around $750,000. But we're looking for a grant that would do street improvements in the Southand Street and Juniata Street area, specifically targeted to the blocks between Juniata and, hold on a second, I should have pulled out my other piece, Juniata and New Dauphin, and much of the street along Juniata Street, all the way west over to Milburn Park, so that we actually are building part of the network of safer streets and safer street infrastructure in that particular area. We have relatively recently paved some of the streets, part of Juniata, some of the Southand Street south of Juniata Street. This particular stretch between New Dauphin and Juniata is the one paving area in Southand that is in fair condition rather than in good or better condition. It's not new. It also is an area that's relatively dark, so we're looking at pedestrian scale lighting, trash cans, in one or two cases, historic markers that designate issues of historic interest for that particular locale. We're looking at some paving. It does not specifically include extensive sidewalk or curb paving, but if there are repairs that are necessary, those would be included. And we have not limited ourselves from looking at other safety-related functions for that particular stretch. We believe with this kind of funding, it allows us to not only make some key investments in an area that has been somewhat overdue in having these kinds of investments, but with the match, it allows us to go significantly further than we might otherwise have gone. In addition, it reinforces other investments that we're doing in that particular location, especially the Milburn Park, making sure that there is a safe passage way from the Southand area via Juniata to Milburn Park, which, as you know, will be built by Kaboom later on this season, the playground, and there will be other enhancements for that park so that it will be a good park for that particular community. Other investments that we've recently made, as you may know, are the acquisition of 3 properties on Rockland. 2 of them are vacant buildings that can be converted into residential, and the other a vacant lot, which can actually become a main entrance into the park itself.
Mr. Campbell, along with the previous resolution, there are no matching funds for this. Does you have to have any matching funds for these grants?
We've identified some matching funds. We do not. We are required to have some match. The part that had been a question until just a few days ago was whether our limit was to go up to only 500,000. We had learned, and Patrick, you might confirm if I'm misunderstanding it. We had gotten a confirmation that we could go above the 500,000 limit, and so the internal funding, if you will, is for about 375 from the Department of Community and Economic Development, with a 375 or up to a 375 match. We do not necessarily have to go that high. So if it is the case, and I apologize that sometimes these things are a bit in flux while you're trying to get the interpretation from the state on how the funds can be used, but if we are limited in any way to just the 500,000, we have a substantial project as described within that $500,000 limit. If we do have the ability to have a little bit more money, which would be part of the city match, then we would do further safety-related enhancements to that specific footprint area.
And when are we looking to start or a completion date for these projects? Obviously, it's not going to happen this year. It'll probably be into the next year. But are we looking to extend it longer than that, or just all the time needed?
It's a very, very good question. Usually the limiting factor is going to be when the state actually makes the funds available to us. It is unlikely that those funds would be made available before the late winter or spring of this coming year, fiscal 22. But once they are available, much of the work that has been identified has not specifically been engineered, but the clarity of the scope is such that we could go forward rather expeditiously, and before the end of next season, before the end of fiscal 22, be able to most likely implement the work that's being talked about. Interestingly, that also will then coincide with some other planned pavement just north of is it New Dauphin? Yeah, just north of New Dauphin, which we expect on Southand to take place either the tail end of 2022 or into 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Do we have any questions from the committee or comments from the committee?
If I may, Counselor.
Please, Councilor Diaz.
I just have one question in reference to bus stops and having I don't know what they're actually called, but it's like an awning where there's an actual area where they would be able to cover in reference to like any type of weather, whether it's snow or sleet. I know that in the city we have them, but in South Ann Street, there's a school, like I think it's Edward Hand, where I've seen residents sitting there, and it's covering them from the weather would be helpful for people to be able to use public transportation. So I was curious to know if that would be something that can be looked at or add on for these types of grants.
I think that what you're talking about is what we would ordinarily call either a bus shelter or a waiting shelter.
Correct.
Whether it's associated with public transportation or not, it's kind of a shelter. Usually they're transparent. They might be open to the air, or they might be covered on 3 sides as well as on the top.
Right.
We had not included that initially in this particular scoping. That does not mean it cannot be considered. We had identified what the needs were based on outreach to SACA and to a couple of other local community organizations, and we would fully expect to reach back out to them to confirm what the highest and most prioritied needs are for that particular stretch. So it's certainly something that wouldn't necessarily be off the table, but it had not necessarily been considered in this original scoping.
And the reason I question is because I actually picked up an older lady that was sitting practically 2 hours waiting for the bus in the rain. And I've seen it in several occasions where there's not even a place where they can sit, even if it's open. So just see if we can, put that up there as a possibility in the future.
So I will say also, though, that this would not obviously be the only situation where people are vulnerable to the elements without having appropriate bus shelters. And there are a variety of other opportunities that we might raise it for, either if it's on a state route for state funding, if it's not on a state route for either local or other transportation-related funding. It may be part of if you will, element in the comprehensive plan where we say this is the kind or the standard of protection that we would like for bus shelters, et cetera, throughout the city in a variety of different areas. If you remember, for the South Duke Street also at New Dauphin, we are looking at the relocation of that particular bus shelter, and that with PennDOT funding is within the parameters of the scope of that particular piece of work. So we certainly can explore it. I would not want it to just be a one-off. I'd want us to be thinking about it in terms of what are the actual needs overall and how do we prioritize them, how do we get them funded, et cetera.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Do we have any questions from the council or comments? Do we have any questions or comments from the public? Hearing none, I'd like to make a I'd like to make a motion to move number 46 to full council.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
That brings us to our third item on the agenda, the Lancaster bike presentation. Mr. Paulson, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Soto, members of the City Council, and Mayor Sirachi. I'm here to give our, excuse me, what should have been our annual report of Lancaster Bikes, the Coalition for Bicycle-Friendly Lancaster, to City Council. Of course, last year we couldn't do it because of the pandemic, but even though we couldn't be here, our coalition continued to meet and was active. Initially, for some history, for some of the newer members of council, initially we were just a group of people, a coalition that was concerned about bicycle safety in Lancaster City. And then with the encouragement, we had the encouragement of City Council at the time in 2011, and with Mayor Gray, and we continued to move on. And our organization was made up of people from city, local, state government, law enforcement, the education communities, the health community, and merchants in the city. And then we eventually expanded to non-city commuters and others interested in riding their bicycles safely in the city. And we incorporated as a nonprofit entity in 2018. We expanded our membership. We have more citizens as opposed to representatives from organizations and entities. We now have we have members on our board from Franklin and Marshall College and from the Lancaster Bicycle Coalition. What is it that we do? Well, we advocate and we educate for a more bicycle-friendly and more safe city. We do this at public meetings. Unfortunately, there is a semi-public meeting going on this evening at this very moment that we were not invited to. Our former mayor, who lives on West Lemon Street, is having an anti-bike lane meeting at his home. And unfortunately, I'm here instead of there. I should be there doing my advocacy thing. But we appear at places like the open streets that the rec center has and provide information to the public on public safety, on bicycle safety. And we distribute education materials that have been provided for and printed by PennDOT and others. We have helped the city and the county assist with their planning efforts. We have worked with the School District of Lancaster to institute programs for the 3rd and 6th grade classes that are focused on bicycle safety and bicycle handling skills. And we have established a program to work with new foreign students at Franklin and Marshall about Pennsylvania laws and regulations and bicycle etiquette. And we now have a member of our corporation, a nonprofit corporation, is an active member on ATAC, which is the county's Active Transportation Advisory Committee. We certainly hope to continue to provide those bike riding skills programs like we have with representatives back to school programs, and along with the co-sponsorship of the AAA at Clipper Stadium. We have, one of us will be going on and doing that with a new private school here in the county. And we continue to provide input on bicycling issues to the City Traffic Commission. Unfortunately, that's been on an ad hoc basis on days that one of us is free to attend those meetings. We hope to be able to do better. And certainly, we want to have a better working relationship with the city police department. We are pleased and congratulate the police department for reinstating and expanding the bike patrol. But our relationship really could be better. The last time we had originally started in 2011 by inviting the police to our meetings, and we have not seen a member of the police department at any of our meetings since July 2019. And we really want to do better and expand, and we keep trying to have more members of the minority communities of the city as part of our organization. What we as an organization hope the city will do is to create a full-time position for the city bike and ped coordinator. That can only help the city with its implementation of the Vision Zero program. It will help ensure infrastructure planning and decision-making process by the bicycle and ped communities. And we would hope that that person would attend the city traffic commissions on a more regular basis and represent the communities. And so one of my personal questions is, and I don't know how else to say this, is can the city code be amended to provide for a member of a bike ped person to be placed on the city traffic commission? We hope that the city will continue to focus on, stress, educate our greater community about the safety of bicyclists and pedestrians in the city. We hope that the city will continue to support, expand, and maintain the city's bike lanes. I know the maintenance has been an issue, but we hope that it will continue. We hope that the city will continue to support and fund and expand the city's bike control, city's bike patrol. And we certainly hope that the city will encourage the police department to have better, more engagement with Lancaster bikes. And certainly, we would like the city to advertise to the greater world, around us, that the city is just as bike-friendly as the county is perceived to be. So finally, thank you for supporting safe bicycling in Lancaster County, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
I have a quick one. Who has been your liaison in the past from the Police Bureau?
It's been a while, and the one person was promoted and has not been, his spot has not been replaced. We had.
How about this, Greg? Can you email me?
Sure.
And I can make a connection. There's been a lot of moving parts, definitely since 2019.
Be happy to do so.
Craig, I want to tell you that, or share with you, 7 years ago, when we first met and discussed about bicycling in the city, regulations and so forth. And here it is 7 years later, I think we've come pretty far, though I admit we have a lot to go, but I think we've come a lot far. We have the bike lanes in place. I think we have more bicycle riders on our streets than we did at least 7 or 8 years ago. And I think if we could do more, I really do.
Councilman Soto, I can't count the number of cyclists I see commuting every day. And I can't count the number of times I see moms and dads riding with taking their kids to school by bicycle. And that only pleases me. And I know that there are other considerations in the city for other bike lanes. And I can tell you that I personally have failed retirement. This is one of my major missions. And so we will continue to work with the city to make the city a more bicycle-friendly place. I thank City Council and the members of the people who work in the city's administration who are focused on this issue. And I know that the city won an award for being a bicycle-friendly community a while ago. I'm still concerned, however, about some of the cowboys who drive through town.
Yeah.
And I'm still concerned about the number of people on bicycles who break the law, going the wrong way, going through stop signs. We are here to encourage the safe use of the streets by everyone, including bicyclists. And you should know that when I see it, I scream about it. And so do the other people on in our group. But thank you for that comment.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
If I may, Councilor? So,
Please.
first of all, thank you, Mr. Paulson, for the presentation and for the advocacy that you do for more bike lanes. I agree. I think, can't remember growing up seeing bike lanes, and to see them all over the city is a pretty cool thing as an adult. I guess this is probably more a question for either the mayor or Mr. Campbell. As far as like future plans for more bike lanes, and I know we had a presentation a couple years back on community input on bike lanes. What is the future of potential new ones?
Thank you for that question. The answer is that the future of bike lanes is very, very positive for the city of Lancaster, partly because by working with Greg, we've been able to identify a lot of the other subgroups that are advocates for bicycling, not just the commuter, which of course is a very strong advocacy entity with very specific needs, but greater clarity about how children use bicycles and commute to and from school or from their variety of activities at all the different levels. We've been able to work with them critically on what makes bike lanes safer, not only for the cyclist, but also for the pedestrian and for the vehicle. What kind of signage, what kinds of things should we be more aware of. And we do continue to ask to partner with them on how to better present the information that's necessary for not just the bicyclists to be better bicyclists, but the vehicle drivers to have a better understanding of how to be careful about bikes, et cetera. In the network of bikes as is understood in the county versus the network of bikes and bike lanes that's understood in the city, things like the eastbound connector are the elements that make those connections. It allowed us to put high on the list of priorities during the Bridgeport study, which just was completed a few weeks ago, that bicycling and bicycle commuting from the east into Lancaster and back is a very, very important piece, and that pinch point at the Conestoga River, where there's really only one lane of traffic in either direction and a couple of very narrow sidewalks, was just absolutely inadequate for any kind of passage in that particular area. So it became an element in the Bridgeport plan for having bicycle access from the east into the city. My hope is that where we have major challenges, how do you get from the network that's in the city connected to the network that's outside of the city? Those pinch points start to get addressed so that they're much more seamless and they are not seen as obstacles, but perhaps as nexuses and opportunities. The straightaways from how do you get from downtown Lancaster to Longs Park, for instance. Harrisburg Pike, is that the option that we've got the way that it currently is? There have to be more bicycle-friendly ways of being able to get from downtown to Longs Park. And I think by working with not only this organization, but other advocacy organizations, we have a significantly better understanding. Last, but certainly not least, in the moment that we're talking about right now, the meeting that he's talking about right now, for instance, there are elements of the community that don't fully understand the benefits or some of the challenges that cyclists have, that vehicles have, that elderly citizens have in using these streets. And we need the advocates to work with us to be able to make it better. I look at the bike network in the city of Lancaster, similar to, if you will, the bike network in Washington, D.C. about 10 or 15 years ago. In DC now, almost every street has bike lanes, bike passage, bike whatever, and it's clearly marked. The population, whether they're vehicles, pedestrians, or cyclists, have a clear understanding of how the public right-of-way is used in all of those variety of ways, and that's what we're looking for by partnering with this organization.
Thank you for that, Mr. Campbell.
Councilor Soto? Thank you. I will just personally attest to the time. I don't know if you remember this, Mr. Paulson. I was coming back from a bike ride, dragging my bike into my apartment, and I passed Mr. Paulson walking a lovely golden retriever, and he looked at me and he said, "Nice reflectors. You're wearing your helmet. I like that. But you don't have a rear light. You might want to think about that since you're riding at night." So Mr. Paulson really is about it on that front. I would actually, for my personal and our collective benefit, when is the next Lancaster Bikes meeting if someone wanted to attend it?
It'll be the fourth Thursday. We've been doing it electronically, and I hope we get back to live pretty soon. Live and in person.
So the 26th, what time?
At 9 a.m. And if we can, I will remember to get you an invitation so you can get in on the link if we're going to do it electronically.
That would be great. Actually, if you would just go ahead and send it to Mr. Harris, and that way he can share it with any council members who may be interested.
Will do, gladly.
Thank you, Councilor Soto.
Do we have any more questions from the council? Any comments or questions from the public? Mr. Paulson, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much for answering my request to come, and I look forward to our continued working together.
Council President, that concludes Public Works
Thank you, Councilor Soto. That brings us to the Public Safety Committee. Councilor Garcia Molina, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have two agenda items today. The first one is Council Resolution Number 43, 2021, urging the repeal of the Pennsylvania firework law.
Yes.
And Mayor, will you be speaking on this one? It's pretty straightforward, but
Yeah, pretty straightforward. So we, the Pennsylvania Municipal League is advocating for a full repeal of the fireworks ordinance that was passed in, I believe, 2017. We've all been dealing with so many complaints, and I think that this has gotten renewed attention, and even Senator Yaw, who is the primary sponsor, has walked back some of his comments earlier following the tragic death of an 8-year-old in York County and other incidents that have happened across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to provide municipalities with more authority to outright ban. So we continue to advocate for a full repeal. That's what this resolution is about. We are continuing to add our voice to the chorus of municipalities who have really unique needs. And I'll just say it is beyond me why this issue is so difficult. It's not a major revenue generator for the state. It dramatically impacts people's quality of life, their ability to sleep, their ability not to be stressed out about their house burning down because of embers falling on their roofs, and in particular for folks who struggle with PTSD and also our pets. And I just those are 4 really significant reasons why this issue is important.
thank you, Mayor. I think we've all heard plenty from our residents around the quality of life and how that's impacted, and really how, as a welcoming city, we have a responsibility to do the best that we can to advocate. So I'm glad that this is coming before us. Is there any questions from the committee or comments? Nope. Any questions from the committee as a whole? Questions or comments from the public? So then I'll hear a motion to move this to full council on August 10th.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And then our last agenda item is Administration Resolution Number 47, 2021, amending the civil service regulations for police hiring. Who are we having for that one?
I think Patrick is going to speak to that. But I will just start the conversation by saying that this is a process in which we are aligning the procedures for civil service examinations between police and fire, so that all of public safety are operating with the same process. And what this will allow us to do is to provide, I believe, a more fair analysis of candidates who are being considered as part of civil service and hiring, to include not just a written examination, but an oral examination with questions that will be developed to address the qualities and characteristics that we are looking for in our police officers that are coming on board. And it will ensure that those oral exams count for a larger percentage than just the written test. And so this is really about getting to the qualitative aspects of an interview, but also developing an interview guide and matrix in which those attributes can be identified and scored as part of the interview process. It also ensures that we have external interview panel, just the same way that we do for the Fire Bureau. Patrick, did I miss anything?
I was just going to say, I don't have anything to add to that explanation for what we're trying to do here. And I guess the only other thing I would add is that the process for this has gone through the Civil Service Commission. They have reviewed all of the regulatory changes and approve those regulatory changes, but the process is that it comes to City Council for actual approval of those. So the Civil Service Board can't make those changes on their own. They have to come to City Council for approval of them, but the mayor ran down that list well.
In regards to questions, will the panel that's selected be selected by the chief, or who will be selecting the panel, the external panel?
So I think typically it ends up falling to the chief to make recommendations, because the chiefs, and I say this both, for fire,
Right.
has had access to and knowledge of chiefs who do this as part of their, frankly, it's almost like mutual aid among police hierarchy or fire hierarchy, that they go to other municipalities and participate in those oral boards. And I think the same thing would happen within the police bureaus, that they would identify police professionals in other municipalities who could serve in this capacity. In all likelihood, Chief Bay and maybe others in our police bureau would end up doing the same for other communities in Pennsylvania.
And the questions that are developed for the oral exam, is that questions that have already been developed, or questions that will be developed by the commission? Or
That's in process now. One of the things is making a bit of a change from, making the questions more of a behavioral type process rather than a, how do
If you
people
were
complete
in
a-
this
how
situation.
do people complete a police report, right? Like, it is more about situational type awareness, community awareness, things like that. Not a sort of a check the box, multiple question or multiple answer kind of a thing.
I'll just, to follow up on that, these are more behavioral-based interview strategy questions that are driving towards specific leadership qualities and competencies that we want to see in police officers. They're being developed by a psychologist and a leadership consultant who are developing 2 lists of questions, and then they're going to review those questions based on the key competencies that they want to see and use those as behavioral based. So an example of that is just rather than an interview question about if you were in X situation, what would you do, versus a behavior-based interview question, which is, tell me about a time in your career when you've been faced with making a difficult decision. How did you prioritize that decision and its potential pros and cons, and walk us through that process? Something like that.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. Is there any other questions or comments from the committee? Committee as a whole?
Just one, if I may. Can you talk a little bit about the weights between the oral and the written exam?
So right now, I believe it is a 70-30 weight toward the written exam, and this would change it to a 60-40 weight toward the oral exam. And just, again, taking much more of the emphasis, reducing the emphasis on the structural aspects of being a police officer. Really, the written exam is as of now, is really testing an individual's capability to complete a police report properly, and taking the weight off of that. Obviously, that's an important part of the job. It is not the most important part of being a police officer, and putting that weight on the behavioral type issues that the mayor addressed.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions or comments from the public? Hearing none, I hear a motion to move this to full council on August 10th.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. President, that concludes the Public Safety Committee.
Thank you very much, Councilor Garcia Molina. I believe this, sorry about that. Thank you, Councilor Garcia Molina. I believe that brings us to the clerk's report. Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mr. President. So in the last month, of course, I've provided this report to you in writing, but in the last month, just to go over some of the things that I've done, the Parks and Recreation ordinance, or I'm sorry, resolution that you had before you at the last meeting is one that I'd written. The fireworks resolution that you have before you tonight is one that I'd written also. For research, I had provided a constituent with a copy of the fireworks ordinance and researched the fire code also for that constituent. I provided information about the rental housing ordinance and the Housing Board of Appeals to administration staff. I researched sales on city sidewalks, a question regarding that for another staff member. I provided a 1995 ordinance for yet another staff member. The Sunshine Act changes. Regarding that, I met with the city solicitor and the council president to discuss changes in the recent changes in the State Sunshine Act and how they would impact city council. I provided a summary of that discussion for you and sent that to you. I corresponded with city staff and with outside agencies, compiled a list of email addresses for the chairs of the various boards, commissions, and authorities, and I arranged a meeting for the chairs. On behalf of the city solicitor, I arranged a virtual meeting that will be held later this month to discuss those changes with the chairs of the various boards, commissions, and authorities. I attended the parking authority meeting, which is always a joy. I attended a public meeting regarding the bike lane on Lemon Street and a virtual meeting about the wellness changes to the city wellness program. And then I was at the police chief swearing in earlier today.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Before we all depart, just want to remind councilors, in addition to all of the work that he's done this month, Mr. Harris today sent an email on behalf to each of you seeking your input on the city's use of ARPA funds. So we just would appreciate if you could take some time this week and make sure you send that Mr. Harris's way. If you find yourself with an inordinate amount of free time, I believe that we also sent you the 151-page interim final rule, but there is also, I believe, a 20-page summary, which you may find more digestible. So thank you all on that front. And with that, I will hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you. I feel much